If you've ever felt more heartbroken over losing a friend than a romantic partner, you are not alone. And you're definitely not overreacting. This is Two Peas on a Pod, and in today's office hours, we are kicking off part 1 of our series on friendship breakups with some real talk about why they happen and why they hurt so deeply. So settle in, get comfortable, because today we are diving into even more stories, science, and secrets of friendship. I'm Dr. Miriam, and this is Two Peas on a Pod office hours. Okay, it is time for another solo office hours episode of Two Peas on a Pod, and I know this is the one that we've all been waiting for, because today we're talking about something that almost all of us have experienced or will experience, but very few of us actually know how to make sense of. We are talking friendship breakups. And I mean, listen, I get that it's a little bit strange to say that we've been looking forward to an episode about friendship breakups, to having a conversation about friendship breakups, but I know that this is actually really true for so many of us. And there are a few reasons why. So first of all, friendship breakups are incredibly common. We have likely all gone through one. And when you saw the heading of today's episode, there's a good chance you were reminded of that friend that you loved and lost. Despite them being so common, though, we rarely talk about them. They can also feel far more painful than romantic breakups, and we're going to get into why. We're also going to name something people have never had language for: the experience of losing a friend, the feelings that come up from there, the uncertainty that you're left with. And the truth is, most of us will experience both sides of this dynamic, being left and leaving a connection that we were once very invested in. And no matter what side you fall on, there really is no roadmap for how they happen or how to end them in a way that preserves your need for connection and your own well-being. So let me break this down for you, because in today's episode, in part 1, here's what we're going to be covering. We're going to talk about why friendship breakups can hurt even more than romantic ones. We'll talk about the real reason most friendships end and why you need to stop playing the blame game. We'll also talk about why this experience feels so isolating, even though it is incredibly common, and just how common it really is. And we are going to talk about the 4 friendship breakup myths that you need to stop believing if you want to stop overthinking what happened and start understanding it more clearly and know what to do next. Make sure that you listen to the full episode, though, because this is going to be essential groundwork for what we're covering in next office hours, where we'll get into part 2 about how you can actually end your friendships, when to know it's time, and how you can cope with the loss of a connection that once meant so much to you. So before we go any further, I want to say something really important. I want to speak to who this episode is really for. Here's what I'll say. If you have ever gone through a friendship breakup, or maybe you're navigating one right now, this episode is going to give you the language, the clarity, and a completely different way of understanding what's happening. And this is true if you're wondering what's going on, if you're the one who initiated it, if it happened to you years ago, or if you're somewhere in the middle. Most of us will experience both sides of a friendship breakup in our lives, and we need to be prepared for what that can bring. Because one of the biggest misconceptions is that only one person is hurting in this dynamic, the person who was left, especially if it's unexpected. And in reality, pain can exist on both sides. Now, here's what's really interesting. As part of this episode, we opened up our phone lines, we opened up our emails to the Two Peas on a Pod community, and your answers, your questions, your stories flooded in about the friendships that you have had, about the friendship breakups that you've gone through. And we're going to get into some of those stories on today's episode. But what stood out to me were the words and the language that you were using to describe the loss that you've had. Buckle up, it's a doozy. My big friendship breakup, all in caps. This being particularly painful. And it's obvious that going through this kind of a friendship experience is particularly painful and is something that feels so challenging and so salient no matter how much time has passed. So I want to get into, for starters, actually the most basic question that exists here, which is, what is a friendship breakup? And this might seem like a really benign way to start the episode, but it is really important because people are using this language interchangeably. This is one of the things I've noticed when talking about this, certainly with clients, but also in workshops that I've given and in our online community even. Here's the key idea that I want you to take away. Going through a friendship breakup isn't just one thing. Yes, of course, we are typically referring to a friendship that is no longer in our lives. But it also really isn't that simple. So if we take a closer look at the different ways that friendship breakups can happen, and we'll talk about this more in the second part of the series where we go into the different ways you can end your friendships. But here's what I want you to know. Friendship breakup can mean a downgrade. It can also mean a dissolution. So a dissolution is when there is a complete ending of the relationship. A downgrade, though, is when we no longer consider that friend as close as we once did. So maybe they've gone from being a best friend to a more casual friend. Friendship breakups can also be voluntary or involuntary, depending on the context. We can want for this, even if it comes with a lot of pain. This can also be something that we absolutely didn't see coming and that we would never choose. They can be active. We can have a more direct conversation. They can also be more passive, where things just gradually fade over time. And we can keep the door open for a future reconciliation, or we can be out of each other's lives forever. And so what I want you to know is that friendship breakups don't always look like endings. Sometimes they look like distance. But when we're having our conversation today, and when I'm inviting you to think about the reasons why friendships end and the different feelings that they bring up, really, we're going to be covering all of these different types of experiences. And so I hope and suspect that you'll find something that you relate to in this. And a big takeaway is that friendship breakups can be so painful precisely because they can be so complicated. And we start to see that complication when we think about just how many different types of friendship endings there can be. So let's actually talk a little bit about that in terms of the different types of friendship breakups that exist, because I've just thrown a lot of information out there. So if we look at some of the research, let's go way back to 1984. There was a study that was published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships. And the author of that study, Rose, found 4 primary reasons why adult friendships dissolve: physical distance, the emergence of new friends, growing dislike for a friend, and the interference from romantic partners and relationships. And I'll just say this, and you've heard me say this before, research on adult friendships is quite rare. And so, I mean, it's interesting to see a study dating all the way back to 1984, but really the research on friendship breakups is just picking up right now. And so one of the things that I'll say is, in some of the work that I've done in the past, certainly in terms of what I see clinically, I would say that we typically sort friendship breakups into 3 main categories. And we'll get into what those can actually look like. So the first is what I'm calling the sudden rupture, where you have this friend, you are incredibly close, you value and cherish that friendship until something happens. There's a clear breaking point. There's a clear before and after. And you, and likely your friend as well, can pinpoint and point to one specific event or conversation or moment where you ceased being friends. Very often, these sudden ruptures happen because of some type of a transgression or betrayal. And you've heard me use the word transgression before. Really, what we're talking about when I say transgression is a violation of a foundational friendship norm, an expectation that we have for our friends, for how they should behave, for how they should treat us. And when a friend violates one of those core expectations, something like trust, loyalty, reliability, very often it can feel like there is this before and after, where we can just no longer consider them a trustworthy friend. We can no longer consider them a confidant. And it's not only a mental experience of considering them in a certain way or seeing them in a certain light, it's also a behavioral one where we decide, I no longer want you in my life. I no longer feel comfortable having you in my life. And I should also say this, I'm talking about friendship breakups as though you, the person listening, and me, the person speaking about this, are on the side of having someone hurt us. But the reality is that we also hurt our friends, whether we intend to or not. We can also, and we do, commit transgressions. And what I found to be so, I'll say, meaningful and also powerful, both in terms of the research that I've done on this in the past and also in your answers that you submitted when we were preparing for this conversation, was that you were willing to talk and share stories about situations where you have been hurt, where there has been a transgression committed against you and your friendship, and also own up to situations where you have said and done things that have hurt friends, things that you can't come back from necessarily. And so your stories flooded in, things like spilling a secret, betraying trust in that way, dating a friend's ex and breaking kind of friendship code. not following through on an important promise made. Things like verbal aggression, of course, whether it's reactive or proactive. And what I mean by that is verbal aggression reacting to something. So there were situations that rolled in where a friend gave you feedback or you gave a friend feedback, and that feedback was not received well. And the friend reacted by attacking, going on the attack, going on the offense. So that would be reactive verbal aggression. Proactive verbal aggression is often something that is a little bit more, let's call it unprovoked, where a friend's having a difficult day or going through a hard time and they just lash out at you. And when something like that happens, I mean, we all differ in terms of our tolerance for things like that, but there can be moments where that just feels like, okay, enough is enough. I'm not taking this. There can also be relational aggression, which we typically think of as like the mean girls phenomenon, where a friend is using your friendship or your relationship in a weaponized way as ammunition. So we think of this in younger children. We see this as, I won't be your friend unless. And we see this in adults too. Sometimes younger behavioral patterns don't go away, even though we expect them to, even though we want them to. There's more than this, though. I mean, I could keep going on and on and on. Your stories came in, a friend not sharing personal information with you in a way that you expected it to be shared, a moment where they shared that information with other people over you. There was one story that came in where purposefully a friend gave little holiday gifts to everyone in the friend group except for our listener. And it seemed like a small act on the surface, but of course and understandably, it made her feel excluded and left her wondering what she had done wrong. Loyalty emerged as probably the biggest theme here when we think about these sudden ruptures. Loyalty in terms of not sharing information, loyalty in terms of spilling a secret, loyalty in terms of gossiping or sharing untrue stories in an attempt to turn people against someone. And so, regardless of the transgression that has taken place, I want you to start thinking about these sudden ruptures as a clear before and after experience. Again, there's been some major issue, some betrayal, some conflict. And here's what I'll say. These sudden ruptures, these friendship breakups that happen seemingly all of a sudden, these can be so hard because not only are we dealing with the significant hurt of whatever that transgression was, we're also dealing with a change in worldview. Our friend wasn't who we thought they were, or even the idea that our closest friendships can cause us harm, sometimes the deepest harm. If we are the one who has contributed to the rupture, the change in worldview can sometimes also be, wow, this is what it feels like to experience profound guilt. Or, wow, I'm capable of hurting someone in this way. Or, I am the cause of the ending of this connection that meant so much for me. And what does that say about me as a person? What does that say about this friendship? What does that say about the stability and safety of friendships in general? And so this combination of the pain from the transgression, no matter what side you're on, and the change in worldview can absolutely make these sudden ruptures and this type of friendship breakup incredibly difficult. Let me just say, I actually think this is worth sharing as well, that and I've alluded to this. I mean, I am not immune to the experience of a friendship breakup. It's something that I have experienced several times over in different ways, and something that I can absolutely relate to, not only in terms of losing a friend or losing touch with a friend, but also the incredible pain and confusion and frustration and anger and sadness and grief that comes with that. And in preparing for this episode, and even in talking to you right now, there are friends coming to mind, people who I have loved and lost, people who I wish I had cut ties with far sooner than I did, where I wasn't necessarily brave enough to take that step to end a friendship that no longer felt aligned, that really didn't make me feel good about myself or about the situation that I was in. And in thinking about some of these people and some of these former friends, there are some of these people who I wish I could reconnect with to this day. There are also plenty of people who I am very happy to leave in the past. And then there are some of these people who I actually still feel a little connected to, even if I don't see them or even if I run into them occasionally. It's just really nice to see their faces and be reminded of the friendship that we once had. And I can still feel close to them, even though we're not actively engaged in that friendship. And so that's a little bit of where my head is at. But in terms of what these relationships look like, I mean, I remember one of my earliest friendship breakups. This was probably the one that was the most devastating. And maybe that's because I was the youngest. I was toward the end of elementary school, leading into high school. Maybe it was because it was my first friendship breakup in the truest sense. And so it felt the most emotionally salient, not to mention like pre-adolescent and adolescent hormones, but also because it was the one that felt the most dramatic in terms of this is somebody that I was close to for a number of years. And of course, hindsight's both 2020 and a little bit fuzzy. And so I know that my recollection of things might not be exactly what happened, and certainly probably wouldn't be her recollection of exactly how it happened. But I remember us being incredibly close and drifting apart a little bit, but still being in each other's lives. And I just remember a lot of toxicity. And I don't throw that word around lightly, but I remember feeling, frankly, quite bullied and taken advantage of. And there was a lot of relational aggression of spreading rumors and lies and backstabbing and talking about me behind my back. And it was really painful and really confusing. And I remember feeling like if I just held on to that friendship long enough, we could get through that period. Or if I just did something better, if I was just patient enough, if I was funny enough, if I was fun enough, that maybe we could move through that and that this type of bullying would stop. And it didn't. And so, I wish I had stopped it, or I wish I had put an end to that friendship earlier. I definitely don't blame myself again in hindsight. I recognize that I was young and nobody was talking about this. And there was a lot of shame too, in terms of just the idea that this was somebody who I trusted, who was treating me in this way. And I think it took me a while to both work up the courage to just really distance myself from that friendship. And also some of that courage came from building new friends, from meeting new people, from expanding my network and realizing, oh, actually, this is what it feels like to be in a close friendship and a healthy friendship at that. And oh, I am not only worthy of connection, but I don't have the time for this. And this just isn't the kind of connection that I value, that I want to be in. This is certainly not how I want to be treated or treat my friends. And there was a lot of relief ultimately that came from ending that friendship. Although I will say later on in high school, there was still a part of me that yearned for that closeness. And part of that was because, yes, there were also aspects of our friendship that were really beautiful and there was so much fun. And she was so funny. I remember that energy and just wanting to kind of be around that. And also, if I'm being very honest with myself and with you, I think there was a part of this where I felt like I had something to prove that, oh, if I could get her now to want to be friends with me, or if I could almost convince myself that I wanted to be friends with her, then that would inherently say something about my worth again. I absolutely no longer believe that. But I do believe that friendship breakups are complicated no matter what. And that's probably the most, I haven't given you any details, but that was probably the most dramatic friendship breakup in terms of the pain that was there and the inappropriateness of some of the behavior. And then I also think of one friend and one friend group in particular. And these are all people who over the years I have lost touch with, largely due to changes in life experiences and priorities, and some challenges that we all, again, inevitably and inherently go through. But I look back on those friendships and those times in my life with so much joy. Yes, there is sadness now with the idea that we don't have that same closeness anymore, but I still feel connected to them. Anytime I see their faces, anytime they pop up on social media, anytime I run into them, around my neighborhood, there's just that moment of, yeah, I miss you. And there's a part of me that wishes that we were still in each other's lives in a more meaningful way. But I've also made peace with the fact that we're not. And that doesn't change the specialness of the relationship and the connection that we once had. The only thing I'll say about this, though, and this is a bit of a caveat. So imagine like a very bold and beautiful asterisk here. While these types of experiences can often be the ending of a friendship, when there has been a transgression, when there has been a major rupture, it's also true that sometimes those can actually generate deeper feelings of closeness and even lead to stronger friendships if they are handled appropriately. And this is something that I talk a lot about, the role of conflict, the role of distance in maintaining and strengthening closeness. And that sounds a little weird, but hear me out for a second. Because if you have a situation where a friend has violated your trust, or you have done something that has hurt a friend in a really profound way, and you are able to navigate through that. You are able to take accountability. You are able to voice your hurt and your pain and your displeasure and your feedback. Your friend is open and receptive to receiving that, and you're able to have a constructive conversation about what went on and the different ways that you're going to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Those kinds of conversations, if and when they happen, can absolutely strengthen relationship closeness, because you learn how to have those difficult conversations, because those difficult conversations can actually feel really intimate and connected. And because once you've moved from the before of that to the after of that, what happens sometimes is that you have actually greater trust in the relationship. You know that that is a friendship that can withstand conflict. You know that that is a relationship where you can have these hard, meaningful, connected conversations. And so I just want to throw that out there, because these transgressions and the sudden ruptures, while they often and usually do lead to not only a friendship breakup, but that true dissolution where you are no longer in each other's lives, they can also, if you are both willing and able, they can also lead to closeness. Okay, now the second type of friendship breakup that I want to talk about is this, the slow fade. And slow fade friendship breakups are really interesting, because here it's actually really difficult to pinpoint a specific moment, a before and after. It just feels like you are on a downward slope of increasing distance and disconnection. There's no one moment to point to. And sometimes that slow fade can have a pretty slow slope to it. And sometimes that slope might be pretty steep. So what that looks like in actual practice is, over time, there is just more and more distance between you and your friend, until eventually you end up in a place where you are either no longer in each other's lives, or where the status of your friendship has clearly shifted, where it's obvious that you are not as close as you once were. It's obvious that maybe the labels that you ascribe to this friendship, a best friend, a close friend, somebody who's in your inner circle, part of your friend group, that those just don't apply. And there are all sorts of reasons why this can happen. So it can certainly be this gradual accumulation of conflict. And that is one of the main ways that I see this slow fade playing out. Conflict are situations where two friends have opposing needs, different worldviews, different needs, different ideal ways of handling situations, different preferences. And over time, that can lead to minor clashes. You wouldn't necessarily say that somebody's done something so wrong or betrayed you in a way that generates these really powerful feelings of mistrust and anger. But maybe you experience minor frustrations about the fact that your friend just doesn't seem to be showing up on time consistently, or that you're noticing you actually don't share that much in common anymore, and you're finding your conversations are a little lackluster and aren't all that interesting. And what's interesting about the slow fade friendship breakup is that not only are they hard to identify in terms of sometimes pinpointing, the exact inflection point, or where the downward slope started, they can also be some of the hardest to navigate, because we can't necessarily always pinpoint what went wrong. Yes, when there's the accumulation of conflicts, it can be more obvious. But there's also situations where we just notice this gradual slow fade playing out. Maybe because we notice ourselves pulling away and we're not even sure why. We just don't feel as close, and so our behavior reflects that. Or we notice a friend pulling away and we can't really understand what went wrong, what we did wrong. And so we try and fill in the blanks. And so these types of friendship breakups can also be some of the hardest to navigate, because we also feel like if we are the one pulling away, we need to justify our decision to end a friendship or our desire to do so. We sometimes want to have the big betrayal or transgression to point to say, see, here's why I ended this friendship, or here's why I have to end this friendship. And when you don't have a clear marker, when you don't have a clear transgression, sometimes we feel like we don't have the right to pull away. We don't have the right to end a friendship. And so one of the patterns that I often see is that people stay stuck in these connections for far too long. Or they stay in connections that are actually sucking time away from other healthier connections, other friendships with people that they feel much more close and connected to. Or people end these friendships and they feel guilty because, again, technically our friends didn't do anything wrong. And so slow fade friendships, even though they're, by the way, the most common way that people end their friendships, they can also be challenging in and of themselves. And we're going to talk more about this in the follow-up part of this series where we get into the different ways that people end their friendships. But again, this is the most common way that friendships end. Even though they are the most common, we can't pinpoint exactly what went wrong. And so what happens is a number of things. Some people end up, frankly, staying stuck in these connections for far too long. Maybe the friendship breakup never happens, or maybe by the time it happens, you are just so frustrated and fed up with what has been happening, with the ongoing distance, with the ongoing disconnection, with the ongoing effort that you've been pouring into this friendship where it hasn't been reciprocated. And sometimes all of that effort and mental energy takes time away from your other connections. And so I notice that people find themselves navigating these types of friendship breakups feeling totally depleted because they also haven't had the mental energy to be able to invest in building out other connections. I also see this, though, that because there is no clear, exact transgression to point to, people feel like they need to justify their decision to end a friendship or even just their desire to do so. And they can end up feeling guilty for even the desire to end it or the decision to end a friendship because technically their friend didn't do anything totally wrong or egregious. And by the way, this can also be particularly painful if you are on the receiving end of a slow fade because it's difficult to understand, well, what did I do? How did I contribute to this? Was I so bad of a friend? And so there's a lot of uncertainty that characterizes these types of friendship breakups. And what do we do when there's uncertainty? We try and fill in the blanks with storytelling. And so there's a lot of self-blame that often happens, no matter what side of the slow fade you end up on. Okay, and then the third most common reason why most friendships end is the one that actually has very little, at least initially, to do with the friendship itself. Life transitions have a way of creating friendship dissolutions and friendship distance. And so when I say life transitions, there is a good chance that something comes to mind, a transition, a change that you have gone through, or something that a friend has gone through. If I think of some of the most common examples here, you won't be surprised. But I'm sure you have plenty to add to this list. So a move, moving cities, moving countries even, moving across the country, parenthood, having other relationships come into our lives, our children, our partners, even new friends. All of that can create a new dynamic and sometimes a new distance within our friends and within our friendships. Not only do they sometimes create time constraints where we're not able to see each other or speak to each other as often as we once did or at the same times of day as we once did. And so there's all the logistical considerations of when and how will we see each other, when will we speak, what are the types of activities that we get to share with each other. There's also a profound personal element to this in terms of how this feels. Do we still feel like a priority? And do we still feel connected? Or have these life transitions and changes changed us, changed our friends in a way where, again, we no longer recognize each other. We no longer recognize the friendship. Or we so deeply recognize the closeness that we once had and we can absolutely point to the closeness that we still crave. And yet, for all sorts of reasons, we just can't find it. I'll also say, very often, when we think of life transitions, they aren't all entirely positive. So yes, moving can often be a really exciting experience. It can also be incredibly stressful. And sometimes it's because of unwanted changes or financial stress or the need to take on a new job or opportunity. We also know that life crises, so the death of a loved one or a serious health challenge, ideally, these are moments where, of course, we show up for our friends, but they can also be moments that create distance because people pull away, because we don't know how to support each other, in hard times or in grief, like we spoke about in last week's office hours with Rebecca Soper from Modern Loss. And so these life experiences absolutely have a way of creating distance in our friendships. Okay, and then here's your caveat for this particular type of friendship breakup, though, because yes, they are painful. They're painful often because we can feel so out of control. We don't have control over the life circumstances or life choices of our friends. And sometimes we don't even have control over our own life circumstances, the things that happen to us, the things that happen around us. And that can make it difficult. But I want to leave you with this. When it comes to these life changes, they don't necessarily have to create distance. They don't necessarily have to create or lead to friendship breakups. And so if we look, for example, at just geographic closeness, which feels really simple, right? A friend moves away and there's the understandable fear that that life change can or might lead to a decrease in closeness, maybe even a dissolution, because over time we'll see and speak to each other less and less. And what we now know is that that actually isn't always the case. Yes, geographic proximity is a predictor of friendship closeness. You have heard me say this before. But what's really interesting is that while physical distance can lead to distance or dissolution, it doesn't have to, because friendships that were marked by greater feelings of interpersonal closeness. So when I can say, oh, this is my friend who's moved away, but I cherish her and I value her and I value our friendship and I feel so close to her and I want to stay feeling close to her. If that friend also expresses that same closeness, not only can that friendship survive, and not only will a dissolution not necessarily happen, the closeness can actually grow. And that friendship can actually strengthen over time, because we will often see a commitment to greater friendship maintenance behavior. And this actually reminds me a little bit of our 2Ps, or I should say our 3Ps episode from a couple weeks back with Pauline Chalamet and Zoe Milonis and Elise Sondic, where they talked about this, that the long distance aspect to their friendship, as painful and challenging as it might be, actually is a little bit of what they credit when it comes to the strength and the connection of their relationship, that it has allowed them space to flourish and to step into their individuality, but it has also forced them to be creative at how they are going to stay connected. And so I say that, and I come back to that because I want this to be a reminder that while all of these experiences have the potential to lead to friendship breakups, to lead to dissolutions, to lead to pain, whether it's the sudden rupture or the slow fade or the life transition piece, they can also all have the potential to bring us closer to our friends and, frankly, closer to ourselves as well. We can have a better understanding of who we are, of what we value, of what we need in friendships, and of the kinds of conversations that we are capable of having and how we can navigate this together. At the same time, though, I know that no matter what type of a friendship breakup you have gone through or might be going through or might face in years ahead, they can be so challenging. And part of the reason why they are so tough is because they reflect this harsh reality of adulthood, of adult friendships, which is we can't hold on to every friendship that we've ever made. And sometimes, as much as we wish we'd stay close and connected, life has other plans. Sometimes it's hard because it also brings to the surface our own feelings of failure. Whether that's feelings of failure because we've committed a transgression and we feel incredibly guilty, or feelings of failure because we notice our issues with time management or prioritization, or just we're noticing a misalignment with our values and how we're leading our lives. And so I share this because no matter what type of a friendship breakup you have gone through or you will go through, it makes sense that they hurt so deeply and that they can be so confronting. You know, let me also say this, though. As challenging as it is, as painful as it is, friendship breakups aren't always inherently problematic. They aren't always inherently undesirable. So you heard me say this in the very first episode of 2Ps on a Pod, where we were unpacking the reality of adult friendships, which is that for most of us, as adults, we lose and replace half of our friend group every 7 years. We lose and replace half of our friend group every 7 years. And so part of why we're talking about this is because this is a normal common and in fact inevitable friendship experience that we will all go through. And part of having resilient friendships and a healthy social network isn't holding on to every connection we've ever made. It's actually getting comfortable with the letting go. It's getting comfortable with the reality that we can and will lose friends. There's also some really interesting research showing that this process of pruning is playing out, where around the age of 25, our peripheral social circle does start to shrink a little bit. And so our inner circle of those close friends, we're replacing half of them every 7 years. And the people who surround that, we might be collecting new people as we age, as we go through adolescence, as we go through emerging adulthood, as we meet people in college, as we're starting our jobs. And then over time, around the age of 25, we start to lose touch with some of those people. And more than that, we start to intentionally create space between us and some of the people in those outer circles. And that is not all bad. That is actually, again, a necessary process because we have to be intentional about how we spend our energy and who we invest in and these specific friendships and relationships that we tend to. We cannot be overextending ourselves at every moment. And as we age, we learn more about ourselves and who we are and what we want in our lives and who we want to surround ourselves with. And so it makes sense that actually that pruning process is reflective of both, sure, a limited capacity, but also a growing capacity for self-awareness. And I actually think that's really great. I think that's a huge positive that we need to be talking more about. And so sometimes the experience of a friendship breakup isn't all that problematic. It reflects this greater self-awareness. It reflects greater intentionality. And in some cases, it actually reflects greater self-respect. I am not going to keep myself or in a situation where I feel taken advantage of. I am going to be much more mindful about who I connect with, who I spend my time with, and I'm going to pay attention to who actually makes me feel good and makes me feel like me. And I think that's a beautiful thing that should be celebrated. And what's really interesting about this is if you look at some of the research, when researchers have asked older adults to describe their social networks, to describe the relationships that they've held on to describe this pruning process, very often older adults are reflecting on their relationships more positively. And so if you are in a position where you are contemplating a friendship breakup, or you are noticing that there is this shrinking of some of those peripheral social connections, I want you to kind of do a little bit of mental time travel and think ahead to that older version of you and imagine what they would tell you about that process. And is there a part of you that can actually see this as something that, yes, can feel painful, yes, maybe even unwanted, but is there a part of you that can also connect to this may reflect an opening to invest more wisely, more intentionally in the relationships and in the people who matter most? I don't want to be all Pollyanna about this. I don't want to make light of a situation that understandably can bring with it a lot of pain. And I know this. I know this because I've gone through friendship breakups that have been incredibly painful. And I know this because in my therapy practice, back when I was doing primarily friendship therapy, the two most common reasons why people came to therapy, one was to build better friendships, to make new friends, and two was to navigate the decision of whether or not to end a friendship. And that's something that we're going to talk about next week in our special follow-up episode on friendship breakups, how to navigate that decision and how to navigate the complexity of the emotional experience that shows up. And so I want to talk about this because no matter the reasons why a friendship ends, no matter what end you fall on, whether you are the one initiating this friendship or not, friendship breakups can be so very painful, so much more painful than romantic relationship breakups. And I hear this time and time again. And so if you can relate to that, you are not alone. Okay, so let's talk about why friendship breakups hurt so badly, why we are all so desperate for outlets to express this pain through. And I think that's part of the reason, certainly why, in some cases, people are keen or open to seeking therapy to process these feelings, to have a soundboard, to better understand what's going on, and to learn to validate their inner experience. And also, frankly, why whenever there's a post online, on social media about friendship breakups, you will see people engage. You will see people engage with that post. You will see people share. You will see people connect with each other. And we saw this on our social platforms, on Two Peas on a Pod. I've seen this on my Instagram in the past where we've had conversations about friendship breakups. People are looking for outlets where they can express their pain, where they can say, what the fuck is going on? And why don't we talk about this? And that's actually the biggest reason why friendship breakups hurt so badly, because we don't talk about them. We don't talk openly about friendship breakups. And so what happens is that people feel so alone in them. People don't feel like they have people or places or spaces to turn to when they are going through a friendship breakup to better understand what happened, to process their feelings, to understand and explore what they can do next. There really aren't open conversations. And more than that, and I should say because of that, there is no social script. There is no roadmap. So we don't have good examples of how this can go or of what this should actually look and sound like. So we don't actually know what is the best way to end a friendship or what is the best way to cope with the ending of a friendship. And because of that, people often make really difficult choices about how to handle this. And I'll just say this, actually, one of the difficult choices that people make is to do nothing. And that is actually a decision in and of itself. And so people choose to stay in friendships for far too long because they don't know whether they can or quote unquote should end a friendship, or they don't know how to end a friendship. Or people feel stuck in their feelings of aloneness and their feelings of pain because they don't know how to move through them. They don't know how to seek support. So all of that relates to this experience of having no script, no roadmap, and no open conversation. Frankly, that's why in the next Office Hours episode, we are getting into exactly this. What is the script? What is the roadmap? What are the different ways for how we can and should end our friendships and cope with that ending? The second reason why friendship breakups hurt so much, though, is because in addition to a lack of a social script or a roadmap, we are often lacking in social support. And frankly, this is related to that first point because we don't talk openly about them. And so we don't fully realize and recognize just how painful they are and just how much our friends often need us when they are going through their own friendship breakups. And by the way, this really differs from romantic relationships. If we think about what a romantic breakup looks like, we generally have certain, I don't want to say rules, but certain guidelines that we ideally follow or that we want other people to follow or that we at least expect, right? So generally speaking, we want to have the open, transparent conversation of we are breaking up. This is over. Here's how we're handling this breakup. Here are the new norms and expectations for how often we will see each other or speak to each other, or are we unfollowing each other on social media? We know that we shouldn't break up with people in a Post-it note. Carrie Bradshaw taught us that from Sex and the City, right? So we know what the, again, quote unquote, right way is to have a romantic breakup or to go through a romantic breakup. We don't necessarily have that same clarity when it comes to our friendship breakups. And so we don't know whether we should have an explicit conversation or whether we should just let things fade over time. We don't know if we should tell our friends exactly what they have said or done to hurt us, or whether we should just let bygones be bygones. We don't know if we can or should turn to our friends for support. Whereas in the context of a romantic relationship, that's exactly what we would do. And actually, I want to get into this because this brings us to the second point, the second reason why friendship breakups hurt so badly. And it's because there is this lack of social support. And so when someone that we know, a friend, is going through a romantic breakup, we are very good at rallying behind them, at knowing that that is a time or life experience where they will need support, at working to cheer them up, of reminding them of their worth, in some cases of reminding them that they are far better off without this partner. We are good at showing up in practical ways by taking them out for a fun night out, taking them dancing, listening and playing to really meaningful, sad, heartfelt music, of bringing over ice cream. We have all of these friendship rituals, I'll say, that relate to supporting our friends through breakups. And yet, when a friend is going through a friendship breakup, we very often don't know what to say or do. Or more than that, we don't even realize that this is a moment where a friend might need us. And so what we do is we just let it lie. Or we do minimize or overlook it. So very often you'll hear things like, oh, don't worry, it's just a friendship. Or you have, so many other friends. Or there are plenty more platonic fish in the sea. And we do this to our friends and we do this to ourselves as well. We invalidate our own pain. We don't give ourselves the social support that we really need when we're going through a friendship breakup. And that's because friendship breakups are a form of disenfranchised grief, a loss that is not openly acknowledged or publicly mourned or validated socially by the people in our lives, including ourselves. And if I'm thinking back to the last episode of Office Hours with Rebecca Sofer from Modern Loss, grief is grief is grief. And so if you are going through a friendship breakup, it is important that you acknowledge that this is a loss. And if our friends are going through the loss of a friendship, it is important that we recognize that this is challenging. And without that social support, the experience of a friendship breakup can be even more isolating and even more painful. There's the third piece of this that's interesting too, though, because I'm talking now about a lack of social support. It's also important to acknowledge the social context of our friendships. And so this adds a different layer. And again, a slightly more complicated layer to the whole experience of a friendship breakup, because when we are going through a romantic breakup, sometimes there is the experience of having to divvy up our friends. Okay, who gets custody of this friend or this friend group? How are we going to navigate that? This, though, is even more common in the case of a friendship breakup, where very often there absolutely are mutual friends involved. And the question becomes, well, how are we going to navigate that? How are we going to either be in situations where we will still have to see each other? Or how are we going to navigate the feelings of we have mutual friends and maybe we don't want to put those friends in an awkward position? Or I need to sit with the discomfort of knowing that you might be talking to our mutual friends about me or our friendship breakup. And whether you have mutual friends or not, one theme I often hear is this: I don't necessarily want to be open with my other friends about my friendship breakup because I'm worried what they will think. I'm worried what they will think if my behavior was the cause of the friendship breakup or related to the friendship breakup in some way, which, by the way, very often it does. And it did, because most friendship breakups happen because of a dynamic. Even if there was one moment of transgression, very often there is something about the mix of the two people that created that moment or that experience of distance. And so there is this fear of what will people think? What will they think of me? What will they think of my behavior? What will they think of my role in the friendship breakup? Will they worry that I won't be a good friend to them? Or there's also just what will they think about me and my feelings about this? I don't want to burden them. I don't want them to judge me for having these feelings. I don't want them to see me in a certain light. And again, that's always why in our online community, in the research that I've done on this topic, I'm always so moved and inspired by people willing to admit, hey, I did this. I did this really shitty thing and I regret it and I hurt someone and I hurt myself in the process. I learned from it and I want others to learn too, which is exactly why I'm sharing it. And so the social context of our friendships, the idea that a friendship between two people is often embedded in a larger social network, that is crucial. It's crucial, it's complicated, and it makes them particularly painful and difficult because not only are we left to process the hurt that's there, we often get so swept up in the follow through. We often get so swept up in the fallout, in the fear of the fallout within the friend group, that we don't even have time to process our own feelings. And then the last thing I'll say about this is the following. And it's probably the most important. The last reason why friendship breakups hurt so much is exactly the same reason why friendships are so powerful and important. It's because our friendships are voluntary. And again, we talked about this in the very first episode of Two Peas on a Pod, where we talked about the importance of choice, the role that plays in the closeness of our friendships and in the experience of feeling connected. So our friendships are voluntary. We choose who our friends are. We choose who we let into our lives, and we choose who we let stay. And that's, again, part of what makes our friendships so closely connected with our well-being and our self-worth and our identity. And it is also why they hurt so much when they come to an end, because we tend to personalize friendship breakups. Because when our friends no longer choose to stay connected, we so easily interpret that as a commentary on us, on our being, on our character, and on our worth. We personalize the rejection, and we believe that it says something about us as a person, as a friend. It's more than that too, though, because our friendships are voluntary. We know that this is a choice. We know on some level that this is an ongoing choice that we are making. And yet we also, interestingly, don't have conversations about the fact that this is an ongoing choice. And what I mean by that is this: we don't have conversations about the longevity of our friendships. So when we enter into a new friendship, we know that this is a choice that we're making. And we know on some level that we're going to have to continue making that choice as time goes on to stay connected. But we don't really have those conversations up front, certainly not with our friends, and also not with ourselves. So when we make a new friend, we don't think to ourselves, is this a friendship that will stand the test of time? Whereas that's exactly the kind of language that we use in our romantic relationships, right? We even self-declare our dating status or interest when we're using apps, right? I'm open to a fling. I'm looking for a long-term relationship. And very rarely do we ask ourselves or each other those types of questions when we are entering into a friendship. And what that means, though, is that the loss of a friendship can take us completely by surprise. We can feel so caught off guard, which makes it all the more painful. I also think it just bears repeating that in addition to the uniqueness of friendship and the uniqueness of a friendship breakup it not only is a loss like any other, it's a breakup like any other. So let's also not forget that as you are going through a friendship breakup and losing touch with a friend, you are also going through all of the other regular breakup messiness that you might face in other types of breakups. So things like this loss of identity, right? Who am I outside of this friendship? Also the loss of a witness. I mean, we share so much of our lives with our friends in terms of sharing stories and also sharing experiences. And so when a friendship ends, you can feel that sense of loss. Not only am I losing this person, I'm losing the shared history that we had. I'm losing the opportunity to be able to connect with somebody over that story that nobody else knows or knows the specific messy details of. And that can be very painful. And it can also be destabilizing. And frankly, our routines can also be destabilized, right? When it comes to our close friendships, we generally fall into certain patterns of when we speak and how often we speak and what activities we share together. And when you lose that connection, very often you lose that grounded sense of reality of, oh, this is how my day goes. I mean, I think of my closest friend, and we speak mostly every morning at almost, this specific time of day. I'm looking at my clock right now. It's 8:54 in the morning. So I know I'm getting a call from her in about 6 minutes. Okay. Which I will ignore. And I'm sorry for that. But here's what I will say. When we lose touch with a friend, when we lose a friendship, a connection that is so embedded into our daily routines and lives, those moments, those predictable moments that punctuate our day, we lose those too. And so our whole routines, our whole daily experiences and lives can feel destabilized. It can feel like we're just floating around trying to find anchors. And layered on top of that is the good old-fashioned, just regular sense of sadness, uncertainty, guilt, shame, anger, that is just so difficult to process. Okay, so yes, of course, there are similarities between romantic breakups and friendship breakups, and all of that gets layered on top of the uniqueness of friendship breakups, which is a big part of what makes it just so painful and so complicated. I just want to come back, though, to this point about the fact that we don't talk about friendship breakups, because that really is a big part of what makes them so profoundly confusing and complicated and difficult and lonely. And it's also a catalyst for connection and for conversation. And I kind of want to actually sit with this for a second longer, because this is actually what led to the creation of this show, of Two Peas on a Pod. And without getting into it too much, because it's not entirely my story to share, I have been approached over the last number of years by various producers and writers and production networks looking to build out content or shows or podcasts, scripted and unscripted, in the friendship space. And frankly, a lot of those projects had felt incredibly voyeuristic. And there were all sorts of ethical considerations as a therapist working still with clients. And yet, there was always a part of me that really wanted to do something in the storytelling space, whether it was a podcast or a show. And it just wasn't the right project. It wasn't the right fit. It wasn't the right time until it suddenly was, because one of our producers happened to be going through her own friendship breakup. And in the midst of that, decided to do a little bit of research, turning online, looking for community, trying to find people and places and spaces who are talking about this, about how profoundly complicated and confusing and isolating it can be. And it was thanks to that research that they found out about the work that I was doing and how I'm talking about friendship breakups. And actually, that is a big part of what led to our initial connection and the whole concept of the show, of Two Peas on a Pod. And so I share that just because I think it really illustrates an experience that so many of us hopefully can relate to. Not only the pain of losing a friend, but it also really beautifully illustrates how it can be a catalyst for connection and for conversation when we're able to channel it appropriately. So when we are able to have conversations, yes, of course, with our friends, with our communities, but when we're also able to turn to people in spaces who are likewise talking about this and be open about the realities of friendship breakups, we can have some very meaningful conversations and we can build some very meaningful relationships. And so I am just so grateful that the show exists and that we're able to have these conversations in large part thanks to the ending of one friendship. Okay, so before we wrap up our office hours together today, I want to just briefly talk about the 4 main myths that I come across when it comes to friendship breakups. These are the beliefs that often get repeated time and time again in my therapy office, in workshops, in trainings, in our online community. And it's worth talking about them because when we hold on to these unrealistic ideas or ideals or expectations of what friendship breakups should look like, of what they should involve, very often that keeps us stuck. That keeps us stuck from moving forward. That holds us back from reaching out. And it holds us back from finding the true and deeper connections that we are so desperately in need of. So myth number 1 is that someone must be the villain, that someone must be the villain. And this is important to talk about because I get that it is a natural, almost instinctual, reflexive reaction. When something painful happens, we want to point fingers. We want to assign blame. And the reason for that is because we crave certainty. We want to be able to say, this is why something happened, because that creates the illusion of control. If we can point the finger outward and say, this is your fault, well, not only does that feel better to kind of shirk responsibility in some ways and to place the blame on someone else, what it tells us and teaches us is also, oh, I should just avoid this person, or I should avoid people like this person, and therefore I will be safe. Sometimes we do point the finger inwards and we blame ourselves. And yes, of course, I full well recognize that sometimes people say and do things and it is their fault and responsibility, and they need to be able to take accountability. And it's important that we're able to identify who hurt us. And yes, of course, there are moments where we have done something, where we are the cause of the problem. And we need to be able, again, to take that accountability, to self-reflect, to better understand what we did, how we hurt someone, how we contributed to the demise of a relationship, and what we want to do differently moving forward. The challenge, though, is that when we look to place blame, when we point fingers, we lose touch with the reality that most friendship breakups happen because of a change, not because of a betrayal. And I'll add to that even more that actually sometimes those painful friendship breakups are the ones where nobody did anything wrong. There were just differing views and values and perspectives. There were different priorities. There were diverging versions and visions of adulthood, of friendship, of how this fits into our lives. So pointing the finger and trying to assign blame is both an attempt to make sense of what happened and to try and protect ourselves moving forward. Myth number 2 is that good friendships should last. And not only that they should last forever. So there is this kind of idealized, version and vision that if a friendship mattered, it should have lasted. And so one of the things that we do is when a friendship ends, we engage in almost this revisionist history where we look back and we start to question, did this person ever really care about me? Were they ever as good of a friend as I was to them? Did they ever care about me in the way that I thought or expected them to? And the challenge here is that we confuse longevity with success. Yes, of course, it is beautiful to have those lifelong friendships, to have the friendships that span decades where we're just collecting stories and memories and experiences together. But when we look at what makes for a quality friendship, there's actually 2 different markers. The first is the, let's call it the overall subjective experience, the quality of that connection in terms of how close we feel, how trusting we feel, the positive memories and experiences that we're able to experience with each other. There's also stability. And stability is interesting because what we're looking at there isn't necessarily how long the friendship lasted. We're looking for an overall pattern of stability. That this is a friendship where no matter how long you actually are in each other's lives, the overall pattern is one of harmony, where you continue agreeing that you are friends for however long you are in that friendship. And so you could have a friendship that exists for 2 years, where you are both incredibly close during that time. It's a friend that maybe you made when you became a new parent and you joined the same circle of parents. It's a friendship that you made in college. And for those 4 years or so, you were incredibly close. And at the end of that life transition, at the end of that life experience, you gradually grow apart. You might also have friends that you have been friends with for decades, but this is a friendship where from one month to another, from one season to another, there's just a lot of ups and downs. There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of instability. There's a lot of uncertainty about where you stand in each other's lives and where you fall in terms of each other's list of priorities. And I say this for a reason, because again, we confuse longevity with success, when really we want to be paying attention to the overall experience, the subjective experience of being in that friendship. And this is why that old adage of people come into our lives for a reason, a season, or a lifetime, why that's so helpful. Because even if we are no longer in that place in our lives or in that friendship, we can still look back on it and appreciate what it gave us. Maybe it helped us to grow. It helped us to clarify our own values. It taught us something about ourselves, about the world, about what friendships necessitate. Or maybe they were there to help us get through something and for us to help them. And so I want us to challenge this idea that for a friendship to be healthy, for it to be seen as a success, that it necessarily should last forever. The end of a friendship is not proof that it wasn't meaningful. Myth number 3 is that you should just know how to do this, that you should just know how to navigate a friendship breakup, that you should know when to let go of a friendship, that you should know how to do that, and that you should know how to cope. And I'm not going to belabor this point because the truth is that we don't. And that is because of everything we spoke about today, that we don't have shared cultural scripts and models for how friendships end. And so again, we improvise it. And sometimes we suffer because of that. And so we're going to come back to this in the next episode of Office Hours, where we're going to get into what actually happens when a friendship ends in practice, how we can end our friendships when we know it's time, how to have those difficult conversations and whether you actually need one, and of course, how to cope with the ending of a friendship, no matter what side you fall on. The final myth that I want to talk about is that friendship breakups tell us who we are. Because here's what happens, and I see this all the time in my work with clients. We so often treat friendship breakups as a character statement. There's so much that tells us that when a friendship ends, it is a reflection of who we are, of our worth. And we talked about this before as it relates to that voluntary piece of friendship. And so this is why, again, when a friendship ends, we tell ourselves, so I'm a bad friend, or I'm not worthy of connection, or I'm destined to be lonely. I'm too much. I'm too little. I'm not enough. And by the way, this process, it's a cognitive thought trap that we fall into. It's called labeling. And we do this for other people too. Again, this is a little bit of that finger pointing. So they're a bad friend. They're the asshole. They're incompetent. They're inherently unreliable or damaged or malicious or immature. And so one of the big shifts that we need to make is recognizing that many friendship breakups are not a reflection of who we are. they're actually a reflection of where we are. That maybe we are now in a place where we are just prioritizing different needs or different relationships, or we're in a place where we're having to work on things, work on strengthening our communication skills, our ability to be assertive and assert our needs and boundaries. Maybe they're reflections of us being in a place where we are just stretched so thin, or where we've outgrown certain dynamics. And instead, where we're stepping into new routines, new priorities, new values. And that so too are our friends. And so when we can do that, when we can avoid labeling ourselves and each other, and to see it not as a reflection of who we are, but where we are instead, not only can we treat ourselves and each other with far more compassion, we can actually feel much more optimistic about our ability to go out and nurture other healthier friendships moving forward. People who are in our lives and people who have yet to be in our lives. And so to wrap things up, I know what you might be thinking. Okay, so this all feels incredibly complicated. And if friendship breakups aren't about assigning blame, they're not always rooted in failure, if they don't always bring with them closure, and if they don't necessarily tell us something about our definitive worth, how are we supposed to make sense of them? And what do we do with them? And ultimately, I get it. I get this. I get this complexity because friendship itself is complex and it is full of tensions. And perhaps the biggest piece of advice that I can give you to be able to not only successfully understand a friendship breakup, but also to move through it is that you need to be able to hold on to this complexity. And in fact, you need to be able to hold on to the different tensions that exist in friendship breakups. So there's this tension on the one hand that, these are chosen relationships. Friendships are chosen relationships, and yet they can also bring with them some of the deepest pain we'll ever experience. There's a tension that there's no clear script, and there are also very clear high emotional stakes. There's also no script for how friendships end, even though the emotional stakes can feel incredibly high. And then finally, the third tension is this. There's a tension between the finality of a friendship breakup and the ambivalence that we are left with. Because for as final as a friendship ending can feel, the feelings that it brings up are rarely so black or white. And yes, on the one hand, there might be that feeling of, I don't know whether I fully want it to end, or I think I might want to rekindle this friendship later on, or the fear of what if I do want to rekindle this friendship later on? What can I do now to make that a possibility? And we'll talk about that in our next office hours together. But there's also the inherent ambivalence about a friendship breakup. So very often when people are deciding whether they want to end a friendship, or if they're going through one, or if they're on the other side of one, there is still this ambivalence in terms of how they feel about that friend. There can be this mix of sadness, love, relief, confusion, sometimes all at once. So we can feel that grief and relief. We can feel anxiety and steadiness that we made the right choice. We can feel guilt about hurting someone and pride in finally centering our own needs. And we can feel relief that something has ended and fear about what it means about our ability to maintain other friendships going forward. And so here is your friendly reminder, and I think it's important to say this gently but clearly. We don't get one part of friendship without the other. We don't get closeness without vulnerability. We don't get meaningful connection without the possibility of loss. And the very thing that makes friendship so meaningful is actually exactly what makes it feel so risky. That doesn't mean we should obviously enter into friendships expecting them to end or anticipating friendship breakups. And it certainly doesn't mean that we should become afraid of connection and feel like we are so closely in touch with that riskiness at all times. But it does mean that in order to be in friendship, in order to build new friendship, and in order to let go of friendship, we have to be willing to hold both truths at the same time. And so here's the part that I hope you will hold on to after our conversation today. If you have gone through a friendship breakup, or you're going through one right now, or you're maybe thinking about one that might have an expiration date, don't let the ending of one friendship become the lens through which you see every connection that is still available to you. You can hold on to the fear, the pain, and the sadness, and also the comfort, the joy, and the possibility of future connections that are headed your way. And speaking of that, here is your next connection step. This week, if a friendship comes to mind, whether it's one that you've lost, one that you've noticed has changed, or one that you are deeply grateful for, resist the urge to try and immediately judge it, or them, or yourself. Instead, get curious. What has made this friendship so meaningful? What changed? And what might that change or loss or impending loss be teaching you about the right kinds of relationships that you want to build moving forward? Because even the friendships that don't last, they can absolutely leave us with something that does. Okay. And that, my friends, that was our time together in office hours. I'm so glad that we got to spend this time together and have this conversation. And as always, I hope that it will inspire you to invest in your friendships with intention and invest in the people who matter most. I will be right back here with you next week for a special follow-up episode of Two Peas on a Pod Office Hours, where we are going to talk more about friendship breakups and what to actually do with all of the information that we spoke about today. Not only why friendship breakups happen, but also how they happen, how we can end our friendships in real life, and how to know when it is time to let go. And importantly, how to cope with the ending of a friendship. So in the meantime, and until then, let's make sure that we stay connected. So follow the show on your favorite podcast platform. Connect with me at the Two Peas on a Pod and at Miriam Kermeyer across social channels. And of course, make sure that you share today's episode with a friend or maybe someone who's trying to make sense of a friendship that has changed. And by the way, if your first instinct is to send this episode to your ex-friend, I recommend maybe you sit with that for a minute, because we have got the episode coming up next week, and I suggest that you listen to that before making any major decisions. Until our next catch-up, take care of yourself and the people in your pod, and I will see you back here next week. Oh, and one more thing, have a listen next to a song called Better Friend that was inspired by a true friendship breakup story from Bramer, the incredible musician who just so happened to create our opening jingle that we love so very much. Take care, friends.
And when it comes down to it, I'm just jealous that you've gotten through it. And I don't want this to be the end. When it comes down to it, I'm so glad you've gotten through this. And I hope that this isn't the end. Oh, let me be, let me be, let me be, let me be a better friend. Do I have to beg for it? Do I have to
Two Peas on a Pod is hosted by Dr. Miriam Kermeyer. Executive produced by Zoe Travis, Matthew Hoffman, Katya Kaminsky, and Dr. Miriam Kermeyer. Produced and edited by Podcast Nation. Producers, Madison Britt and Alicia Paneer. Audio engineer, Miles Carter. Original music by Sarah Walk. Created by Zoe Travis and Matthew Hoffman. Two Peas on a Pod is recorded in Montreal and Los Angeles. Today's program contains information that is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This program is not a substitute for psychological or medical advice. Please seek out your own support and research as needed. Take care, friends.